Located in northeastern British Columbia, the Fort Nelson First Nation is a community with a deep-rooted connection to the land, passed down by our ancestors since time immemorial. In recent decades, linear disturbances such as seismic lines, winter access roads, and pipelines have spread through our forests, changing species relationships and our relationships to the land. Linear disturbances provide predators, like wolves, easy access to caribou habitat. As the disturbances have expanded, we have witnessed a dramatic decline in local caribou populations and are concerned other species will follow without substantial healing to the land. So, the Fort Nelson First Nation has taken restoration into our own hands, embracing both Indigenous and Western knowledge to guide the ways we manage and protect our territory. By honoring our Indigenous law of sharing knowledge, we have created a series of guides on how to conduct a caribou habitat restoration program. Our linear restoration program includes 3 main phases: planning, implementation, and monitoring. In this episode, we will discuss 3 winter restoration techniques we use during implementation. Before restoration work can begin, it is critical to first determine the limiting factors present at your site. A limiting factor is a variable in the environment that limits tree growth and stalls recovery of lions. For instance, too much or too little water, compacted soil, or competition from other plants. Limiting factors develop from a combination of site types and the construction methods used when creating the disturbances we're trying to restore. There may be different limiting factors in uplands and peatlands, and different factors if a bulldozer or mulcher was used to create the disturbance. By first understanding the limiting factors present at your site, you can choose restoration techniques that address those specific challenges and are best suited to the local terrain. In our region of British Columbia, forested peatlands dominate the landscape our community is working to restore. Peatlands are wetlands with deep layers of sphagnum moss-based soils. The moss forms raised mounds called hummocks that trees and other woody vegetation grow on. These natural mounds function as the building blocks of a forested peatland, controlling soil temperature and moisture and providing the ideal growing conditions for trees like black spruce and tamarack. By sitting above the water table, hummocks play an important role in helping seeds germinate and tree roots grow without drowning in the water below. As industrial disturbances and seismic lines are cut into peatlands, they often remove and flatten hummocks, creating colder and wetter soil conditions. Without access to the drier soil that hummocks provide, seed germination is reduced, and seeding roots do not have enough space to develop before growing into the water, killing the young tree. Wetter soils also encourage growth of shrubs, sedges, and other plants that crowd out tree seedlings and make it even harder for small trees to compete on impacted sites. Once you understand the ecosystem and the limiting factors of your disturbed landscape, trial and error will likely be needed to create techniques and processes that will work for your site. We knew that successful restoration of disturbed peatlands would involve the creation of raised microsites to provide the soil temperature and moisture conditions for trees to thrive. Our team first attempted restoration work in the summer months, but the wet landscape made travel difficult. So, we transitioned to winter restoration, finding the frozen landscape more easily traversed. Over the years, our team has trialed many restoration techniques. Some worked and some didn't. With each season of experimentation, we hone our techniques and improve the quality of our restoration work. Prior to implementing winter restoration treatments, it is important to first prepare the disturbed line to ensure the safety of the crew and reduce the chances of equipment getting stuck. Line preparation, or packing the lines, needs to be completed along the stretches of line to be treated, as well as along the routes used to access these areas. First, we use skidoos and then snowcats to pack down the snow and drag the surface smooth. This protects any naturally recovering vegetation under the snow and hardens the ground surface enough to ensure equipment and crews can travel safely. The intensity of line preparation required depends on the treatments and size of equipment you'll be using. By using lightweight machines, our preparation work doesn't require us to drive frost very far into the ground, and it doesn't require us to water our lines to ice them in. If you will be using heavy equipment in your restoration work, freezing your lines may be necessary to ensure safe access. The Fort Nelson First Nation uses 3 different techniques in our winter restoration work. Number 1, transplanting hummock. Number 2, stem bending. Number 3, roughing up. The technique selected for use depends on the site's specific characteristics, and these techniques are often used in combination with each other. The first technique we use is the hummock transplant method, developed by Bin Zhu out of the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. A hummock transplant involves taking a hummock, often supporting a small tree, and physically moving it from the surrounding forest onto the disturbed line. We target hummocks that support live trees up to 150 centimeters tall, but sometimes we'll transplant hummocks with larger trees or no trees at all. We have found transplanting hummocks both recreates the micro-topography needed for the new trees to grow and plants those trees at the same time, so there is no need to return later with a tree planting crew. This method also gives restoration a head start because the transplanted trees are much taller than those planted by a planting crew. Hummock transplants take care to do properly and require an adequate number of candidate trees next to the disturbance, so it is not an option at every site. To transplant a hummock and a tree successfully, operators must aim to scrape the hummock off the ground instead of digging out a large ball underneath. The hummocks can crumble when transplanted, so the flatter the operator can scoop the hummock, the more likely it will maintain structural integrity. Successful hummock transplants will maintain their shape for years and create the needed microsite above the water table to allow the newly transplanted trees and other vegetation to thrive. The second technique used is stem bending, first developed to slow the movement of large predators such as wolves. Stem bending involves the tipping or bending of large trees from beside the line to mimic wind throwing. The fallen trees, some landing flat on the ground, can also create microsites beneficial for new plant growth. We have spent a lot of time refining our tipping techniques to keep as many trees standing and connected to their roots as possible. Ideally, a tipped tree continues to live and grow, partially blocking the line. With our current approach, operators target large trees and attempt to loosen part of the root ball opposite the line, then gently tip the trees over and across the line from their base. This reorients the trees but keeps them connected to the soil and, hopefully, growing. This technique takes advantage of the ability of black spruce to right their tips and convert branches to main stems after being blown over, to create long-lasting, living fences across treated lines. There are substantial limiting factors to this technique though, including the need for ample amount of tall trees directly beside the disturbed line. Trees are also vulnerable to snapping when this method is used in extreme cold. In the years following the application of the stem bending treatment, our hope is to see lateral growth from bent trees revegetating the line quickly and effectively, while also working to slow predators of caribou. The newest technique being explored by our team involves the creation of scrapes and duff piles, also called roughing up. Traditional mounding techniques scoop large chunks of peat from the surface, leaving behind deep pits next to each new mound. Our nation desired to find a way to create mounds that were gentler on the existing terrain. The concept of roughing up was created by an operator on our team, Greg Lohman, who discovered that scraped duff and shrub materials could be piled into small mounds instead of being scattered. This technique has proven to be a very quick way to create micro-topography, scratching at the line and creating deliberate piles of material in small hummocks. This technique is used in areas where transplanting hummocks and stem bending are not possible, such as in an open landscape or sparse forest. While the technique is effective in quickly creating microsites, there is still a need to revisit the site with a tree planting crew. Operators must delicately work to scrape off the top layer of the line with the bucket teeth, akin to a cat scratching, and then use the material gathered to form small hummocks. As a relatively new treatment still being developed, our hope is it will prove to be an effective technique to create microsites on more barren landscapes. Once a line has been treated, the next step in the restoration process is monitoring. An adaptive restoration program is only possible with extensive follow-up and data collection. By measuring a variety of metrics during implementation and subsequent growing seasons, our team can see what works and what doesn't, helping to inform our program's operational decisions for the future.